Hey guys, tonight we settle into a time and place where the quiet of winter wasn't just silence. You're not sitting in your cozy bedroom anymore. Instead, you find yourself tucked into a small, sturdy pavilion in the imperial city of Chang'an, the beating heart of the Tang Dynasty. Circa 750 AD, outside the paper window, the world is beginning to slow down. The first flakes drift past, the amber glow of a nearby lamp, and you can almost feel the air growing heavy, pulling the noise out of the vast, sprawling capital. Listen closely. The usual clamor of the Eastern market, the shouts of the silk merchants, the rhythmic pounding of the blacksmith's hammer, the incessant chatter of a million souls moving through the grid of streets, is suddenly fading, not with a crash, but a gentle, atmospheric erasure. This is the moment, the sacred hush that the great poets of the Tang era lived for. It's a silence so profound that when the next flake touches the earth, you swear you can hear that infinitesimal sound. We are here to understand why the sound of falling snow, which is technically no sound at all, was the most beautiful music to the ears of the most revered poets in Chinese history. You are witnessing one of the world's largest, most magnificent cities, a grid of 2 million people being swaddled in white cotton. You know, if you were a commoner without proper heating and sufficient charcoal reserves, you probably won't survive this week without some serious discomfort, maybe even frostbite. But tonight, you are a sheltered guest, privileged to observe the transformation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're already subscribed, perhaps send a quiet thought of appreciation to the poor servants who have to shovel the 3 feet of snow. That will arrive by morning. Let me know where you're winding down tonight and what the local time is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the snow thickens, you instinctively draw your silken outer robe tighter. The walls of this pavilion are made of rammed earth and wood, but the windows, that's the key. They aren't glass, which was rare and prohibitively expensive. They are delicate, lattice, worked frames covered with thick, translucent paper. The paper diffuses the lamplight into a soft, hazy glow. And more importantly for our purposes, it acts as a very effective sound barrier. It's what first filters the overwhelming din of the city, even before the snow starts falling. When the snow begins, it doesn't just block sound, it starts ours absorbing it. Think of the city's soundscape as a raging river. The window paper is the first dam, slowing the current. The snow is the vast, open plain where the river finally dissipates into 1,000 silent, invisible streams. You step close to the paper window and press a cool finger to the rough surface. Outside, the geometry of Chang'an is being smoothed away. The city was meticulously laid out in a perfect, enormous grid, a mainstream historical fact that speaks volumes about Tang administration and imperial order. It was divided into 108 residential wards and 2 market wards, all enclosed by massive walls. Imagine a modern city block, but instead of open streets, each ward was a massive, walled-off neighborhood with gates that were locked every night. At the 5th drum, typically around 9 p.m., the city would fall into a mandated, military-enforced silence. This official curfew already made the Tang capital one of the quietest megacities in the world, night after night. But now, With the snow, you experience the double silence. The snow is not merely adding to the silence, it's changing the quality of the silence. It's not the sharp, empty silence of a deserted room. It's a rich, pregnant quiet, full of potential. The sound waves, unable to bounce off the soft, uneven texture of the freshly fallen snow on the rooftops and courtyards, simply vanish. Even the creak of the distant watchtower, a persistent, mournful sound, has been swallowed whole. You realize that a great benefit of the pervasive silence was the sudden elevation of small, intimate, domestic sounds. Inside your small room, you hear the low, soothing crackle of the charcoal brazier, heating a pot of warming rice wine. You hear the faint shush of the servant sweeping up a few fallen ashes on the stone floor. You hear the slow, deliberate grind of the inkstone as your host, a minor official and dedicated poet, prepares his writing materials. These small, contained sounds become the universe. They are grounding, real, and yet completely separate from the noise of the political and commercial world outside. It's the ultimate ASMR experience, curated by an act of nature. For the Tang poet, the falling snow was a great equalizer. It stripped away the superficial differences and distractions of status and wealth. Outside the walls of your pavilion, there are palatial homes of princes and the cramped, muddy alleys of the poor, but under the blanket of snow, the sights and sounds are homogenized. This physical silence forces an inward turn. The poets weren't just passively enjoying the quiet, they were actively seeking the state of mind it induced, a state of Da's meditative awareness and acute sensation. This is where the humorous side of the human condition comes in. You might think, well, if they wanted quiet, why not just move to a hermitage in the mountains? But that would be too easy, wouldn't it? The magic of the snow in Chang'an is that it creates a natural, temporary hermitage within the bustling urban sprawl. It gives you the solitude of the mountain while keeping your charcoal supply close and your friends within walking distance for a good wine party, which, let's be honest, is essential for generating truly melancholy poetry. A quirky or fringed tidbit of the era is that some scholars believe the mandatory, strict city curfew was actually a huge driver of the Tang Dynasty's literary output. Poets had nothing to do but write after sunset, and the snow simply perfected that imposed downtime. The city's magnificent structure, the grid, is part of the atmospheric change. The wide, straight avenues that normally echoed with the clatter of carts are now silent. Deep canyons of white. The silence amplifies the sense of vastness and also the sense of enclosure. You are a small human in a massive, cold universe, and this particular juxtaposition is catnip to a good Tang poet. They didn't write about happiness. They wrote about Oz loneliness, friendship, parting, and the transient nature of life. The snow provided the perfect acoustic stage for these themes. Historians still argue whether the frequency and severity of winter snows actually increased during the Tang era compared to previous dynasties. Some climate scholars point to the era's medieval warm period, suggesting the Tang might have experienced slightly milder, average temperatures than later Chinese dynasties, making the heavy snowfalls a more dramatic, less common event, thus increasing their poetic impact. Whether it was milder or not, the perception of a harsh, isolating winter was a powerful trope, and the snow was its symbol. It was a sign that the natural order, wild and unstoppable, had briefly overwhelmed the rigid, human order of the capital city. The poet at your side carefully dips his brush. You watch the smooth, dark ink touch the white silk paper. He is writing about a friend far away, perhaps traveling the dangerous mountain roads or stationed as an officer on the frozen frontier. The snow reminds him of that friend's isolation, but also of the purity and strength of their bond, which is as white and lasting as the snow itself. It is a moment of profound, shared humanity created by an absence of sound. You step back, allowing the quiet to wash over you fully. It's the quiet of deep focus, the kind of quiet that lets your own scattered thoughts finally settle. You realize this is the true value of the silence. It's not just peaceful, it's productive. It's the sound of the world hitting the pause button so that the poet, and now you, can finally listen to the small, inner workings of the mind. Remember how the city noise usually pulls you outward, demanding your attention. The snow pulls you inward, asking you to reflect. It's the most luxurious quiet you will ever experience. You become aware of the subtle variations in the falling snow's sound, if you can even call it that. It is less a sound and more an impression of sound. A feather, soft hiss if you open the window a crack, a delicate, almost subsonic hum of the flakes layering themselves one upon the other. It's the gentle weight of silence pressing down. The paper window is acting like a diaphragm, absorbing the sound waves and letting only the most fundamental vibrations through. You lean in again, trying to catch the elusive whisper that the poet swore was there, the sound of the world being remade in silence. The cold deepens, and with the silence comes the need for inward retreat. You shift from the window back toward the comfort of the heated space. This movement is a key element of the winter poetic life. The intentional journey from the vastness of the snow-covered capital to the cozy, almost monastic confinement of the scholar's inner chamber. We left the poet preparing his ink, a deliberate, slow process that is itself a form of meditation. Now, you observe the space he inhabits. It's small, perhaps 8 by 10 feet, dominated by a simple wooden desk, a shelf of rolled-up scrolls, and the aforementioned charcoal brazier. This physical contraction of the world mirrors the psychological contraction required for the true poetic state. You find yourself in the heart of Dawes's isolation's chill, not just the physical cold, but the purposeful social freeze that the literati embraced. For the ambitious official, isolation in the Tang Dynasty was usually a punishment. Exile to a remote province was a common political weapon. But here, the poet actively chooses a temporary internal exile. The snow is the excuse, the cover story, for an essential act of withdrawal. It's a gentleman's holiday from the tedious demands of court life, the relentless pursuit of promotion, and the draining formality of social calls. Imagine the alternative if it were a beautiful, sunny autumn day. Your host would be compelled by social custom to be out visiting patrons, attending banquets, or performing the endless cycle of ritualized political networking. The snow, however, provides an unassailable alibi. I regret, esteemed friend, that the heavy snow makes travel impossible. One could write in a brief note. Everyone understood. The snow was a DOS permission slip for introversion. It's a very satisfying thought, isn't it? That a major city's weather system could grant the world's greatest poets a temporary, guilt-free sabbatical. The room, though small, feels immense in its quietude. The air is still and heavy with the scent of pine charcoal and dried ginger tea. You watch as the poet takes his brush. The way he holds it, vertically, his arm floating in the air, suggests a deep concentration. Not just on the character he is forming, but on the sound around him. He is listening for the absence of sound, which is, paradoxically, what he wants to write about. This focused listening connects deeply to the philosophy of the time. The act of writing in this profound stillness becomes a spiritual exercise, a quirky or fringe tidbit. Many Tang-era paintings depict scholars enjoying the snow, but they often show the scholar seated alone, or with one or two very close friends, rarely in a large, boisterous group. This suggests that the ideal appreciation of the snow was a quiet, almost solo contemplative actors, with the occasional presence of a single kindred spirit who understood the value of shared silence. It was an intellectual filter. The man who demands conversation in the falling snow is clearly not a man worth knowing. The silence also amplifies memory. In the absence of present distraction, the mind naturally wanders to the past or to far-flung friends. The greatest mainstream historical fact about Tang poetry is that themes of haphazard parting and exile, saying goodbye to a friend, or thinking of someone far away, dominate the corpus. The snow, with its visual purity and its acoustic isolation, was the perfect backdrop for this bittersweet reflection. Every falling flake became a memory, a mile traveled, or a tear shed for a lost companion. The soundless patter was the gentle rhythm of nostalgia. You can almost feel the poet's mind working. He isn't listening for the editor's noise of the snow. He's listening to the editor's absence of the world. This is the moment where the environment becomes an extension of the self. The white of the snow reflects the purity and potential of the blank writing paper. The stillness of the outdoor scene reflects the stillness the poet is trying to achieve within his own mind. Think about the sheer impossibility of this quiet in modern life. Even with noise, cancelling headphones, you still have the buzz of electricity, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant thrum of traffic. The Tang snow provided a true, deep, acoustic vacuum. This purity was what they called this jing sijin, which means as calmness, quiet, or stillness. This concept of jing was central to Tang aesthetic and spiritual life, borrowed heavily from Taoist and Buddhist teachings. The snow didn't just create jing, it embodied it. Now for a light joke. If you were living in the Tang Dynasty, the biggest distraction wouldn't be a push notification. It would be the sheer anxiety of whether your meager charcoal supply would last the week. Suddenly, the silence of the snow seems less spiritual and a little more practical. Ah, the beautiful, quiet snow. I must write a poem before my toes go numb. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of the snow motif in poetry was a genuine reflection of lived experience, or if it was simply a well-established literary convention, inherited from earlier dynasties. Was the poet truly moved to tears by the snow, or was he just following the established rules of the game? The prevailing scholarly view suggests it was both. The convention existed because the sensory experience was so universally powerful. The snow was a recognized, shorthand symbol for isolation, purity, and profound contemplation. It was the original literary shortcut for setting the mood. Your host finally lifts his brush, hovering over the paper. The quiet is so intense you feel as if you might spoil the moment by breathing too loudly. You realize how different this is from the usual poetic muse of the time: the moon, the wine, or the beautiful courtesan. Those are active, emotional muses. The snow is a Zitra's passive sublime muse. It doesn't demand, it simply allows. It creates the acoustic and visual space for the poet to hear his own voice. Imagine the sensory detail required to translate this feeling. The poet isn't writing. It is snowing and it is quiet. That's boring history for sleep, but it won't be great Tang poetry. He's writing about the way the light catches the falling flakes, how the air feels heavy on the skin, and especially the near-silent sound of a flake hitting the dried bamboo outside the window, a sound that is a whisper against the vast silence. It's the ultimate example of negative space in art. The silence is the canvas upon which the tiny, perfect sound is painted. This focus on the small, almost imperceptible detail, the light crackle of the brazier, the shackles of ash, is the essence of what makes this quiet so soothing. It's not a scary quiet, it's a nice, intimate quiet. It's the quiet of a shared secret between you and the universe. The snow becomes a veil, drawn across the face of the anxious world, leaving only the essentials visible and audible. You are reminded of how the ancient Egyptians used crocodile dung sunscreen, which was a bizarre thing, but necessary for the time. Similarly, the Tang poet's extreme isolation was a necessary and extreme measure to achieve the clarity his craft demanded. As the quiet deepens, the very idea of less time seems to stretch and become less urgent. The hustle of the court, the rush of official business, all of it is trapped outside the paper window. Inside, time is measured only by the rate at which the charcoal embers dim and the speed at which the ink dries on the page. This temporal shift is deeply relaxing. You are freed from the tyranny of the clock. If you were the poet, you would use this time not just for creation, but for refinement. The silence is the ultimate editor. Any stray thought, any weak phrase, any false note in your poem would be immediately obvious in this intense stillness. You couldn't hide a poorly chosen word in the general noise of the city. The snow forces honesty, both in poetry and in self-reflection. It is, in a very real sense, a cleansing silence, preparing the ground for true understanding. You start to understand why the poets cherished the sound of the falling snow. It was the sound of their minds clearing. The rhythmic, almost mesmerizing focus on the inkstone, the slight scratch of the brush on the paper. These are the only sounds allowed, and they are sounds of creation. The world outside is paused so the inner world can begin to sing. You remain in the poet's chamber, still bathed in the profound quiet that the snow has wrought. The physical stillness has led to a mental stillness, and now we must delve into the Dashra's philosophical depth of this experience. The Tang poet wasn't just enjoying a quiet moment, he was engaging in a profound spiritual and artistic practice deeply connected to Taoism and Buddhism, the twin pillars of refined Tang thought. The soundless sound of the snow was, for many, an audible manifestation of zevwa or as emptiness. Think about the contrast. The life of a scholar. Official was one of relentless activity, examinations, political maneuvering, bureaucratic paperwork, and constant striving. The snow, however, imposed a sudden, unbidden absence of this activity. In Taoist thought, the ultimate truth often lies in emptiness, sex, or the void, and air's unconditioned nature. The falling snow silent, pure, and covering the rigid. human-made grid of the capital, was seen as nature restoring the original state of the world before human ambition and noise corrupted it. The sound, or lack thereof, wasn't just relaxing, it was holy. It was the sound of the universe returning to its untainted core. The poet at your side slowly sips his warm wine. His focus is not merely on the beauty of the white landscape, but on the philosophical lesson the snow imparts, the fleeting nature of all worldly things. Just as the snow appears suddenly, and will certainly melt, so too are the official's titles, the merchant's wealth, and the emperor's power temporary. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Asdar's Tang Dynasty itself, despite its grandeur and stability during its peak, eventually collapsed into fragmentation, demonstrating the very transience that its poets contemplated in the snow. This contemplation is why the soundless sound of falling snow was so cherished. It created a state that mirrored the Buddhist concept of braziers mindfulness, or samadhi, a deep, focused concentration. The small, minute sound of a flake hitting the soft roof tile, or the gentle, all-encompassing muffling, forces the attention away from the grand, distracting narrative of daily life and onto the immediate, tiny, present moment. You're not thinking about last week's failed promotion. You're thinking about the delicate perfection of that single, melting crystal of ice on the window lattice. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to this philosophical immersion is the practice of listening to the mountain wind, or hearing the pine waves during the snow. These were highly formalized poetic acts where the literati would sit in their enclosed spaces and try to imagine or mentally reconstruct the sounds of nature that had been silenced by the snow. The Oz silence didn't just mute the world. It gave their imagination an empty canvas upon which to paint the as-perfect sound, an idealized nature untainted by human interference. They were, in essence, creating their own personalized ASMR track in their heads, fueled by the stillness. You notice the poet finally sets down his brush, finished with a stanza. He gestures toward the window, and you lean in once more. The sound you are straining to hear, the faint whisper of the descending world, was often described in poems using words that denote desert delicacy, weightlessness, and softness. They didn't describe a loudness at all. They might say the snow fell, like the sigh of an old monk, or like dust settling on a forgotten scroll. This language reveals that the aesthetic pleasure came from the quality of the silence around the snow, not any noise the snow itself made. And here's a light joke for you. The Tang poets were probably the original minimalists. They realized that the less stuff you have, and the less noise you have, the less anxiety you carry. Though, if you tried to take away their wine and their charcoal brazier, I assure you, the philosophical emptiness would very quickly become practical outrage. The Taoist ideal of Zazen simplicity is also perfectly reflected in the snow's aesthetic. A complex, colorful world is reduced to two colors, black ink and white paper, the very tools of the poet. The intricate patterns of the city are dissolved into simple, smooth curves. Everything is returned to its most fundamental state. The soundless snow was the ultimate lesson in air's unadorned truth. Historians still argue whether the depth of this philosophical connection was universally felt by all educated Tang men, or if it was primarily in their elite literary poesy, used to distinguish high culture poetry from the more vulgar, everyday songs of the common people. Did the busy official genuinely achieve Taoist enlightenment while watching the snow? Or was he just happy to have an excuse to drink wine indoors with his friends? The debate acknowledges that while the philosophical ideas were genuine, the practical application of the snow aesthetic certainly served a social signaling purpose. You feel the cold seeping slightly deeper into the room, a pleasant, bracing chill that keeps the mind sharp. Remember the intentional isolation. That also helped reinforce the values of their education. The isolation of the snow meant a break from political hierarchy, allowing the true hierarchy of talent and literary skill to emerge among a small group of friends. In the silence of the snow, the best poem was the only thing that mattered. You watch the poet carefully roll up the silk scroll. The act is slow, deliberate, and final. He has captured the soundless moment. You are now leaving the height of the philosophical retreat and moving toward the next logical step in the Tang winter tradition as a celebration. The quiet retreat and the inner clarity it brought had to be shared. After all, what is the point of a profound realization if you can't drink excellent wine with a friend and write a few more poems about it? The intense, philosophical stillness of the snow-covered chamber was never meant to last forever. After achieving that clarity, after the inner world was purified by the soundless sound, the poet's next impulse was almost always social. You now move from the solitary contemplation of the snow to the lively, yet still intimate, atmosphere of a snow viewing party. This gathering isn't a massive, boisterous banquet. It's a controlled, cozy affair. Perhaps 3 or 4 close friends gathered in a slightly larger room or a dedicated studio, still protected by those paper windows and the thick blanket of snow outside. The fire is the centerpiece of this scene. Unlike the small, functional charcoal brazier you saw earlier, this fire might be contained in a larger, ornamental stove, its heat radiating outwards, pushing back against the deep winter chill. This is where the wine comes in. The consumption of rice wine, or ji, was deeply intertwined with Tang poetry, and the snow provided the ultimate pretext for serious drinking. It was believed that the wine not only warmed the body, but also loosened the tongue and freed the spirit, allowing the poet to transcend the purely technical constraints of versification. This, of course, is a very poetic way of saying they got tipsy enough to stop caring about their rhyming schemes. You watch as a servant carefully ladles warm wine from a bronze vessel into small, delicate porcelain cups. This is not the chilled white wine we often drink today. This is usually heated, perhaps infused with dried herbs or ginger, a practice that makes the experience profoundly warming and intoxicating. The lost warm wine and the gentle, muffled atmosphere work together to induce a state of mild, humorous melancholy that was essential for their literary output. The table before you is laden with small dishes, maybe some salted plums, cured meats, and fresh pickled vegetables, all carefully prepared to complement the potent drink. A mainstream historical fact is that the vast network of the Grand Canal and the superb imperial road system of the Tang Dynasty ensured that even in the heart of a deep winter, fresh or well-preserved delicacies could reach the capital, distinguishing a refined gathering like this one. They weren't just eating to survive the cold, they were dining to inspire art. As the wine loosens the atmosphere, the discussion turns naturally to poetry. But even the conversation retains the soft cadence of the snow. No one shouts. No one gesticulates wildly. The sound is contained and intimate. This is the ultimate test of true friendship, sitting in profound quiet, only occasionally breaking the silence to share a perfect couplet or offer a gentle, wine-soaked critique of the latest verse. Here's a light joke about the situation. You realize the entire evening is a beautifully choreographed, high-culture paradox. They spent the first 2 hours seeking the silence of nature, only to spend the next 4 hours trying to break that silence with the noise of their own philosophical arguments. It's like going to a quiet spa just to bring your own drum kit. The U.S. Poetry Contest, if you can call it that, begins subtly. One friend recites a line, perhaps about the solitude of a fisherman on a frozen river. Another, without missing a beat, adds the next 2 lines, commenting on the bitter cold and the enduring strength of the human heart. The rhythm and sound of the spoken characters become part of the ambient experience. The snow, the charcoal's faint crackle, the soft clink of the porcelain cups, it all forms a complex, layered soundscape where the only thing allowed to be truly sharp is the wit. A quirky or fringe tidbit of the night is the common practice of chilling theirs, water used for the ink stone, with fresh snow. This was not strictly practical, but it was considered aesthetically superior, a way to ritually connect the writing process directly to the pure, clean muse of the winter landscape. The ink ground slowly with snow water was seen as having a superior spirit or energy, cleave, capable of capturing the true essence of the scene. Historians still argue whether the poems written in the heat of these snow viewing parties are genuinely superior to those composed in sober isolation, or if the tradition of the Evzaz wine, fueled impromptu versi, simply gave poets an easier route to publication and fame through social networking. Was the muse in the snow or in the bottom of the cup? It's a debate that pits the romantic ideal of inspiration against the practical reality of social capital. You observe the final, crucial step, the act of viewing itself. The paper windows, which kept the cold out and muffled the sound, are now the canvas. The poet and his friends occasionally rise to look out, not to see the busy street, but to gaze upon the newly formed, monochrome landscape. The world is simplified, and this visual simplicity, the dark outline of trees against the pale white, is intensely satisfying. The soundless falling snow is the atmosphere that holds this entire, exquisite scene together. It's the ultimate backdrop, giving weight and meaning to the warmth, the wine, the friendship, and the fleeting beauty of the verses created. The sound of the falling snow is the sound of Wagner's perfect, gentle harmony between nature's stillness and man's appreciative art. The morning arrives, but the quiet remains. You wake not to the sharp, startling sounds of an urban dawn, but to the soft, diffuse light filtering through the paper windows, muted and white. The snow has stopped, but its effect, the vast, profound mufflings of the world, lingers. You are now leaving the intimate setting of the Tang poet's chamber and considering the broader legacy of this soundless sound. What can this ancient, snow-induced quietude teach us about our modern reliance on perpetual noise? We spent the night experiencing a sensory environment that is almost impossible to replicate today, a massive city falling into a deep, natural, acoustic vacuum. In the Tang Dynasty, the snow was an extraordinary, temporary white noise machine. an ambient sound that wasn't sound but was powerful enough to shape an entire artistic movement. It was the whisper of history's white noise. Think about modern ambient soundtracks. The 10 hours of gentle rain, the forest crackling, the white noise static designed to help you sleep, the sound of falling snow, as the Tang poets understood it, was the organic, original version of this. It was Ars therapeutic noisy, created by its own absence. It forced the ear to focus only on the small, grounding details, the fire, the breath, the inkstone. This focus is what makes the historical experience relevant to us. We seek out nature sounds precisely because our man-made environments are too cluttered with distracting, non-essential noise. The final question you are left with is one of cultural weight. Why did this particular sound, the snow, become so deeply symbolic, while other great silences, say, the silence of a foggy morning or a starless desert night, held less consistent sway in the Tang poetic tradition? Historians still argue whether the lasting cultural weight of the snow theme stems from its inherent beauty, or if the poetry simply became Azir's self-referential, with later poets copying the established, successful themes of early masters like Du Fu and Li Bai, reinforcing the theme until it became mandatory. In other words, did they love the snow, or did they just love the famous poems about the snow? This self-perpetuating literary tradition is the quirky tidbit here. The sound of the snow was amplified by the sound of poets echoing other poets. You recall the intentional seclusion of the poet's chamber, the social withdrawal that the snow permitted. This act of isolation connects directly to the modern concept of digital detox or the search for deep work spaces. The Tang poet's isolation was a matter of survival for his craft, achieved only when the snow made political and social travel inconvenient. They used nature's power to enforce a beneficial boundary. And here's one final, light-hearted joke to tuck you in. If a Tang poet traveled to a modern city and discovered noise, canceling headphones, he would probably be delighted. Write a quick poem about his newfound tranquility, and then immediately run off to find a decent cup of warm wine to celebrate his technological escape. The soundless sound of the falling snow was a powerful blend of Azir's aesthetic beauty, philosophical truth, and social conveniency. It granted purity to the landscape, emptiness to the mind, and an excellent excuse for a party with friends. It was, in every sense, the perfect muse for a civilization that valued art and contemplation above the daily grind. As you allow the last vestiges of that ancient, purified silence to settle around you, you realize the enduring appeal is simple. The sound of falling snow is the sound of the world taking a needed, silent breath. The darkness of the pavilion is deep and welcoming now. The ember glow of the brazier has softened to a low, rhythmic pulse, almost like a slow, steady heartbeat keeping watch. You don't need to strain your ears for the sound of the falling snow anymore. The image and the feeling are complete within you, a quiet knowledge tucked gently beneath the surface of your awareness. The world outside, the ancient city of Chang'an, is safe, sealed away by that soft, white barrier, its immense noise finally hushed. There is nothing left to observe, nothing left to analyze, only the deepening comfort of the enclosed space. Feel the quiet spreading, moving from the rooftops and the distant streets into the very air around you, softening the edges of the room and the edges of your thoughts. Allow the stillness to become the only reality, a gentle presence that requires nothing from you. You are held by this ancient, profound peace, the kind the poets sought for their deepest reflection. Just breathe slowly now, letting the vast, historical quiet wrap itself around you like the softest silk robe. The journey is over, and the world is still. Let the gentle darkness claim you now,